Welcome to our third event in the series Culture, Conflict and Recovery. When we scheduled this event, we did not know that we would be dealing with a new conflict close to us. Tragically, many of the themes that we will be looking at in this series are already showing their relevance in the unfolding disaster in Ukraine. The destruction of culturally important sites has already begun with the bombing of Babyn Yar, and it seems inevitable that much more destruction will occur before there is an end to the war. So the role of culture in emergencies and post-conflict situations has suddenly become an issue that has a very topical importance in Europe, as well as in places in Asia that have been affected by conflict for a long time. As with other meetings in this series, in a moment I will hand over to Jonathan Ragheda to introduce our speakers and to lead the discussion that will follow. But I would just like to give you advance notice that on Monday next week, we have inserted an additional event into our programme on the subject of the impact of the Ukraine war in Asia. The notice for that event will be going out this afternoon. Please look out for it. As usual, if you have any questions for our panelists today, you can post them in the Q&A channel, and Jonathan and our panelists will do their best to answer them. With that, I will hand over. Jonathan.
Thank you very much indeed, Michael. And I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to our colleagues from the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, Rudi von Planta, Ragheda, Aldoni, and Tamuna TsivTsivadze, joining from Georgia, Palestine, and from Switzerland, respectively. At its very heart, this lecture series has been about exploring or encouraging a shift in mindset amongst development and humanitarian actors, encouraging people to think about the transformative impacts of culture in fragile contexts. At its heart, it's really about shifting budgets as well, getting people to spend money on culture and investing in cultural programs. So we're extremely privileged and fortunate to be joined today by the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, who fund cultural programs around the world. So I'm going to pause there and we'll take lots of questions as we go through the talk. And I'll be chairing a discussion at the end of the presentation. So over to Rudi and colleagues.
Yes, thank you very much, Jonathan. Thank you very much, Michael, for giving me the floor, for introducing me and my colleagues Ragheda and Tamuna. I'm very happy to be here and very happy to share these informations and especially the engagement of STC, of the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation in culture and development, especially with a focus on countries that are affected by fragility, conflict, and or human rights. As Jonathan already said, I'm going to give you a broad overview of the engagement of STC, STC being the developmental humanitarian branch of the Swiss Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and also covering, of course, the topic culture and development. So I'll give you a broad overview of what STC is doing in culture and development, but especially, of course, with the focus on fragility and conflict and the importance of a continuation in conflict or post-conflict situations on cultural aspects. And then I will hand over to Ragheda, who is based in East Jerusalem and responsible for the culture program in the OPT, in the Occupied Palestine Territories. And then afterwards to Tamuna, who is based in Tbilisi, responsible for the cultural program in the South Caucasus of STC. I will try to share my screen to give you a short or some kind of pictures as well. And I hope this will work well. Okay. I'd like to start with 3 statements why STC is working and supporting arts and culture in its development issues, in its humanitarian interventions. Arts and culture as a human right and arts and culture as an engine for social change. So what's the narrative behind it? What's the reasoning behind it? arts and culture as a human right. Well, free access to and participation in cultural life is a human right. The promotion and the protection of free artistic expression, the access to art and cultural diversity mean a contribution to the protection of human rights. Culture is therefore worthy of promotion as such and an important element in the development of each society. The protection of cultural rights, the protection of human rights is the responsibility of every state, and they also, the cultural rights being part of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So the Swiss Ministry of Foreign Affairs has included the cultural rights and the engagement in culture and development in its human rights policy, in its human rights foreign policy, if you like, and it includes the preservation, the development and the dissemination of art and culture, the cultural participation, and of course, the preservation of cultural heritage. The second statement is the free artistic expression as the basis of a strong civil society. So here comes the connection between the culture, between the arts and culture, and the governance issue. We see arts and culture as an important part of a functioning democratic system, just as the free press being part of the checks and balances system. Also, artists and artivists are kind of a power in a state or a power in a democratic system. And if you want the free press being the fourth power, the arts and artists being the fifth power in a democratic state, because they reveal, they criticize, they open up, and they kind of do also the checks and balances of whatever is democratic acting. Artists draw attention to inequalities and abuses. That's what they do by making them visible and exposing them. So the promotion of art and culture, therefore, means a strengthening of the civil society and is a stimulus for exchange and debate, mostly in safe spaces, sometimes in, let's say, less safe spaces. And the third statement I want to give is intercultural exchange and dialogue as the basis of peace. So artists enable dialogue and debate between conflict parties, between minorities and majorities, between young and old, between religions. They offer a space to debate and to dialogue, and therefore contribute to social cohesion and, in the end, hopefully, and very often, to peace. Let me give you a couple of numbers of how SDC, the Swiss Agency for Development Cooperation, bases its activities on culture. Just quickly, because numbers are never very funny and very exciting, but 1976, it's the Swiss Legal Act for International Cooperation, where culture and development is part of. 2005 is the year of the UNESCO Convention, the UNESCO Convention on the Protection and Promotion of Cultural Diversity, which furthermore gives us the reasoning to work in this field of action. 2016 is the last version of the SDC culture policy. For us, a very important document. If you want to read it, you can read it on our website. And then, of course, 21-24, SDC receives a mandate from the Swiss Parliament, and culture and development is part of this mandate. So that's also where we base our activities on. 2030, I don't have to very much mention it, the SDGs. There's no specific goal on culture, but some sub-goals, and of course, part of every or of many of the SDG goals include arts and culture. So we work in two reasonings. The one is we have a cultural percent, which means that each and every of the SDC offices worldwide, and you see the countries which are colored on this world map, where we have SDC offices. In every office, at least 1% of the budget must be invested in arts and culture. So this is something unique, I guess, for development agencies. And there are, and we hear it afterwards by my colleagues, Ragheda and Tamuna, very interesting interventions being implemented in countries affected by conflict or natural disasters, and of course, in countries that are not affected by fragility and the others. And on the other hand, we have this SDC cultural program in Switzerland, where we have a certain budget to invest every year. We have 10 partner organizations and festivals in art, in theater, in film, in dance, in literature, where we grant access for artists from the South and the East, if you want, to the Swiss and the European or the international cultural scene or cultural markets. So the mandate is not the Swiss culture which we promote, but the mandate is really to promote arts and culture from the countries of the South and the East in Switzerland and abroad. And so let's dive into the topic of, well, why is culture and development important or of utmost importance, if we say so, in countries affected by fragility or by conflict or by natural disasters, or more of them together. If I can just quickly read what I wrote as words on the left side of the slide. Well, artists, what do artists do? They draw attention, they make visible, they expose, they contribute. And some of the aspects which they contribute to are, well, they expose inequalities and abuses, they contribute to dialogue, to social inclusion, they contribute to the reduction of conflicts and even to the prevention. They contribute to peace, and they draw attention to minorities, to cultural diversity, and of course, a very important aspect is they contribute to well-being, to joy, and they bring intercultural skills. So all of these aspects are of utmost importance in situations of fragility or conflict or post-conflict and natural disasters. Just a couple of examples. Art and culture are, as I said, very important in humanitarian situations. After a conflict or a natural disaster, the resumption of cultural activities is key. Artists, they draw the attention to inequalities and abuses by making them visible and exposing them. This is an important aspect in the situations that we want to talk about and where we give you a couple of concrete examples in a minute. Arts and culture promote dialogue. They promote social inclusion and the reduction and prevention of conflicts through the use of peaceful means. The participation in cultural activities furthermore gives joy, inspires, gives hope and perspectives, and helps to cope with crises and conflict. Arts and culture help to solve problems. Well, I just leave this without an explanation. Social cohesion can be strengthened through art and culture. Minorities, their languages, traditions, and cultural diversity can be protected and strengthened. Art and culture mean, as I said before, dialogue, but they also mean constructive criticism. They mean creativity, and they give and they contribute to well-being. Arts and culture improve mental health. Well, I mentioned the well-being, I mentioned the joy. During the last 2 years, the COVID-19 pandemic, and I don't know where everybody is joining this discussion, but in many countries, it's still going on quite dramatically. But anyway, we realized in the last 2 years that arts and culture is something of great importance. And we realized because we didn't have access in many places, in many countries, such as Switzerland, we didn't have access because they were just not, well, happening, the cultural events, and we realized how much we missed them. A couple of examples, and then I hand over to my colleagues. A couple of quick examples what SDC also does, and then we dive a bit deeper into the two contexts. For example, the culture program of SDC in Burkina Faso, they support actors to improve their capacities to strengthen the civic education, to strengthen the good governance, but also the social cohesion in a situation which is well, I don't know if you can talk about conflict, but at least a fragile situation. Honduras, a context with a lot of violence, high homicide rates. The STC Culture Program promotes culture and historical memory in Central America, and in order to stimulate the processes leading towards more inclusive and especially less violent societies. Another example is at the Horn of Africa, especially the Somalia, especially Somalia, where culture is an important tool for strengthening local cultural identity and social cohesion, of course, and intercultural exchanges, especially among marginalized groups. So the promotion of tangible but also intangible Somali culture, cultural heritage is part of this intervention. Before giving the word to Ragheda, I want to mention a last point, which is also relevant in these situations of fragility and of conflict or post-conflict. The economic factor, let's not forget the economic factor. The creative economy, the cultural industries are if not one of the most dynamic sectors in the world. I'll just give you an example from Switzerland. We have just about 200,000 people working in the cultural sector, and they contribute to the Swiss GDP comparable to the watch industry, which is very famous in Switzerland, but also or comparable to the pharma industry. This is not only true for Switzerland, this is not only true for Europe, but this is true for many countries in the South and in the East. So let's not forget the economic factor. To support cultural, let's say, interventions means a supporting of a great economic idea behind and a great economic sector and factor. I want to stop for the moment and give the word to Ragheda, based in East Jerusalem, who will tell us about the STC projects there. Ragheda, please.
Yes, thank you, Rudi. Yeah, Ragheda Aldoni from Palestine, occupied Palestinian territory. I would like to present our cultural program in Palestine. And first, I would like to mention that the Palestinian arts and culture is really very rich, and it's rooted and diverse. But despite all that, the complex and constraining situation the Palestinians are facing on their daily life, which is related to the long-lasting Israeli occupation and their policies of fragmentation and isolation, which led also to the mobility difficulties. On the other hand, it's also the Palestinians are really facing the internal fight between the two main Palestinian political parties in Gaza and West Bank. And add to that, it's the increased conservative elements. All that actually, can we go to the second one? Rudi, the second slide there. So all that, the life that they are living in are affecting the Palestinian social cohesion, preventing them from being active members in their communities, and discourage them of taking part in social, political, and cultural life. And as I mentioned, the art and culture is really very rich, but the people are hesitant of taking part and participate in the cultural life, and add to that social, political. For that, we build our STC cultural program in OPT, try to help or try to encourage people participation. The second slide, please. Yeah, we try to encourage active participation and social engagement within the communities and with their local authorities. Here, it is important to mention that our cultural program is included within the local governance domain, with the issue of enhancing and encouraging social participation and accountability. Also here, we wanted to promote the community's role as agents of change. And we are using culture and our creativity as a tool to enhance democratic debate and promote social inclusion. So this is mainly what we are doing here. Can we see? We witnessed through our engagement, the second slide, please, that there is really a real and a very active participation by the communities that we're doing our involvement in. We have, actually, we are doing it in different ways. One of them is that we do a direct implementations in the locations we wanted to intervene. And all the time we have artists on board with the team. Second issue, we did it with the intervention with the schools, and which the teachers, the schools, the students, and then the community around. And by this, we are really making it a more sustainable when you are working with the schools. And the third one is by engaging artists, giving grants to the artists themselves, encourage them to do their project as a social intervention. Now we will see a short video about the whole intervention of most of the activities we are doing, and then you can take an idea about the involvement and the activities and so on. Can we have the video, please? Now, according to...
Please just bear with me 1 second. And,
yeah, it's okay. I will continue talking until it starts. Yeah. Now we really, when we encourage, now, yes, you can see here, that's the, here it's in a school. The intervention is in a school. The students are taking part in the school, trying to address, because they are meeting and they are trying to address a problem that they are facing. Here it is an intervention in a location. Here is an artist who took this initiative. And here is also a location. And the involvement is really very high. People who are participating in the project, they all stated that they perceive the project as a platform and an opportunity through which they can express their aspiration and meet their responsibility as active players in their communities. The project also have changed their views of the arts, since the project has allowed them to become source of data and inspiration, to feed into art projects, to be key player in producing art projects, and not only, of course, not only mere receivers. The artists themselves who participated in the projects, they see much more value in their artwork, since it's inspired from people's needs, and since people can relate to it and interact with it. It's not anymore just done for the elite people. And there is also, we witnessed that in some of the project, an organic voluntary collaboration between the community, the municipal council, and some civil society organization who all came and start working together in the community. And there's also another issue that was really one of the outputs that we were not planned to, that when each location we were working, there was really, we fostered a core activist team and mobilizing volunteers in each community. And that's, now they are continue working after even the project is end in this location or in this small village. This is in a nutshell, a quick introduction to our program in the occupied Palestinian territory. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ragheda. I will hand over the word right away to Tamuna, who will present us the SCC cultural program in the South Caucasus. Therefore, Tamuna, the floor is yours. I will just find the relevant slide and go there.
Thank you very much, Rudi. I am Tamuna TsivTsivadze, and I'm representing the Swiss Cooperation Office for the South Caucasus, funding the implementation of the Regional Arts and Culture Project. I thought that some of the general facts on the region might be interesting for you. That South Caucasus region still has pervasive Soviet legacy, despite the fact that 30 years have passed since the Soviet Union's collapse. We still have young democracy, fledgling civil society, limited rule of law, and human rights violations, in particular in some parts of the region. There is political volatility and instability that is very much vulnerable to internal and external shocks, like recently with COVID-19, as well as with the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh and right now in Ukraine. We do have protracted conflicts that obviously oftentimes experience certain flare-ups, just like recently in 2020, again in Nagorno-Karabakh. We have multicultural and multi-ethnic society, which is our strength, but also at the same time, it is an easy target for various external shocks. The region, especially at least two countries in the region, have strong aspirations towards the EU. However, we again have quite strong Russia's geopolitical interests. Next slide, please. At the same time, culture in the South Caucasus is rather rich because we have rather rich cultural heritage. We have very strong local art scenes with long traditions, but with lack of funding, especially with lack of private sources of funding. We do have emerging innovative and diverse forms of artistic expressions and new artists, which oftentimes clash with conventional way of art making, and thus lacking the state funding, which oftentimes goes towards more conventional ways of artistic expressions. And we also have unexplored potential of intercultural dialogue and exchanges, despite number of protracted conflicts and different confidence building measures. Culture as a tool has not been fully explored so far. Next slide, please. Conflict, fragility, and natural disasters push us rather to be creative and innovative, especially with recent events of Nagorno-Karabakh conflict as well as COVID-19 pandemic. And that's why our regional arts and culture project that we have been running since 2017 has very much undergone certain changes. The project that I mentioned has been implemented, funded by Switzerland since 2017, and its aim was to foster a pluralistic, innovative, and participatory cultural sector in the three countries of the South Caucasus by supporting two main means of contemporary art, like documentary film culture as well as photography. Obviously, because of the recent events in terms of public health affected by COVID and then Nagorno-Karabakh, a number of activities had to be tailored, and that's why I would like to discuss relatively at length the documentary film component, which has been affected by the recent events. So exactly, the COVID-19 and Nagorno-Karabakh triggered our implementing partner to be more creative and innovative in terms of changing the formats of the events. They moved a number of its activities towards online mode, also to extend the participation of filmmakers beyond the South Caucasus and inviting the Central Asian peers to dilute the conflict potential during the discussions, to come up with rather well thought out mixed groups of filmmakers during 3 months of online work as part of the film mentoring program, disallowing the war-related positioning and Facebook posting that would by no means be helpful for the work. And there was extra sensitivity in terms of the topics of the trailers that were supposed to be presented by the filmmakers during the mentoring program. All of this brought rather good results and allowed us to continue business as usual during the pitching session that followed the mentoring program. So it showed that there was potential to work, to have the work going on between the filmmakers in the South Caucasus, although obviously the participation of the Central Asian peers was key those days. Next slide, please. The COVID-19 again gave us some opening and potential, apart from showing the challenges in terms of using the documentary films for the benefit of education process at schools, especially in terms of civics education, which is rather new in the South Caucasus. And it allowed us to exactly screen these documentary movies online, especially during when children were under lockdown. It allowed us also to raise the school community's awareness on the benefits that documentary films usually have. And then, of course, it contributed to the civil society building from the early age, because the documentary films allowed school children to look deeper into the reasons behind the rationale behind the documentaries. So they started to think more critically, to reflect on what they saw. They were introduced to basic human rights and values, and they also saw the real world challenges and real people. Obviously, as a Soviet legacy, we still experience lack of free thinking, lack of analytical perspectives, and also lack of ways to be more open in terms of when interacting. So that's why education movies very much serve the purpose of democratic citizenship education. And the interest from the school side was so big that we decided to fully focus on education movies through education in the next phase that we have now entered, and we'll be showing the education movies in the public schools in Georgia, in Armenia, and Azerbaijan, and even at the universities. Next slide, please. Basically, this is the end of my presentation. However, I want to once again underline how important the role of culture is in the fragile context, in the post-conflict situations, in the setups affected by natural disasters. And this is now more than ever true when the conflict in Ukraine is going on. And hopefully when the military activities will cease, Ukraine will need manifold support. And this is when the role of culture should not be overlooked and should not be undervalued, because culture will have a very strong role to play in terms of bringing back confidence and trust, as well as social cohesion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed for those really great presentations. We've got a couple of questions here. I have a number of my own, and I thought I'd abuse the right of chair to ask those first. Forgive me if I bounce around a little bit here. I'll try to group some of the questions as thematically as I can. I just wanted to start with a very general question to begin with. What impact has your cultural program had on the Swiss embassy's relationships with host governments in each of the countries that it works with? You're quite different from many organizations and many governments in that you have this cultural program. So I wonder if you could just reflect on that a little bit.
Maybe I'll start, and then I hand over to my colleagues who are working in the embassies on the ground. I myself have worked in an embassy as well in Central America. Of course, leading cultural programs gives entry points. It's an apolitical form of collaboration where you have entry points which, as we call them in fragile contexts, have they have no political implication, and therefore it's, if we want, sometimes also kind of a low-hanging fruit to get into debate and into dialogue on certain topics that are being promoted by artists and artivists. So if you talk about, or if you ask about the impact of cultural programs on the embassies, I think it's the impact is mainly in, let's say, giving access to topics, giving access to certain ministries, giving contacts, and opening doors. But maybe I give the word also to Ragheda or to Tamuna on that.
Yes, here the situation a little bit different, but usually we have a kind of coordination if there is any major problems we would like to address. We as a development office coordinate with the representative or the Swiss embassy to ease some of the high restrictions issue if we can, to liaison with us if we wanted to do a kind of a permit for the artist movement. You know, sometimes it's because you can't enter Jerusalem as an example, and if we have anything to do, an activity in Jerusalem, and you need to bring somebody, you have also to, that they need to have a special permit to enter Jerusalem. So sometimes we have these kind of things, but it's not very much major. Just to raise awareness about the difficulties the artists are facing if they wanted to do their activities, if they wanted to move, if they wanted also with not only with the occupation, also with the Palestinian Authority, because sometimes there are some problems the Palestinian artists are facing of trying not to, it's not easy to sometimes to conduct some of the activities. Maybe if mainly if we have some conservative people who are attacking them and so on, and it happened last year, then one of the artists was attacked, then was arrested and so on. And it's such things, few things, but it's not in a very high level. And that's what we are doing.
And then, of course, if I may add, the direct impact is of course on the cultural scenes and on the cultural systems where we work. Ideally, the STC programs are longer term and with a strategic focus, where policy dialogue is an important element of. And so what we try to do with the interventions is support and influence the cultural system in the countries.
Tamuna, I don't know if you were trying to jump in there as well.
Yes, I was. Yes, I just want to very much compliment what Rudi has said, that culture is indeed a door opener and an entry point in many setups and in many contexts. And culture in the South Caucasus and in Georgia has been historically very valued and significant part of our life and history. So that's why it allows us very much to enter the discussions and negotiations in many fields, but at the same time, it allows us to tackle in a subtle and delicate way such topics like human rights, gender equality, labor rights, which might not be always accessible and easy to discuss, especially in the conflict setup or with ethnic minority groups. So indeed, obviously without instrumentalizing the values that culture brings, but it very much supports and complements the development work. And this is what is important to see, that the work that we do can only be further strengthened and reinforced if we would somehow go hand in hand and we would enrich each other.
Thank you. And that actually leads quite nicely into my second question, which was, I had the privilege of working with some of your colleagues in Central Asia recently. I think one of the interesting questions that we sort of talked a lot about at that point was, how, as a government agency, with a diplomatic status and a diplomatic mission in each country, do you walk that line between encouraging civic space, which in some contexts governments may find threatening because it presents opportunities for sort of different messages, different conversations from those that the government might want to have more control over. How do you balance that relationship and that line between creating space for civic dialogue and also being a strong and supportive partner of the host governments that you work with?
Can I, oh, sorry, Rudi, what?
Go ahead.
Yeah. Because this is something that we are really here doing, mainly because our culture, as I mentioned, cultural program, we integrated it within the local governance domain in order to encourage civic participation and democratic debates and so on. And actually, the issue that when you are using art and culture in this issue, then it will be much, it will not be something that you are criticizing just to criticize. You are being taking a very innovative or creative ways that you let your voice reach to your authority without making them starting to defend themselves. And we witness that in many places, where at the beginning, when you start having the authorities, local authorities, and people start to talk to each other, they were hesitant, but afterward, using these kind of techniques and artistic tools, then it will become like you are breaking the ice between them and start the dialogue. And actually we succeeded, and most of the local authorities where we working, it's not only village councils or municipalities, it's also you are bringing others on board. They are starting to understand the issue and started to be more cooperative and working together, trying to solve the problems that has been raised by their communities, because it was addressed on a way that it's not make the others be more offensive.
Yes, thank you, Ragheda. Maybe a kind of explanation from my side. It's a very important question you asked, Jonathan. And that's why I was trying to kind of show that SDC, that we base our cultural interventions on the human rights and on the governance issues, because cultural rights are human rights. Free artistic expression is a human right. And hence, of course, if SDC or any other donor or funder funds artistic or arts projects, and you respect the free artistic expression, then you cannot always say, well, what comes out at the end? And if there is some constructive criticism coming out at the end, of course, it gets political. But anyway, if it's still in the framework of the human right, as we say it, as free artistic expression, that's what we base our interventions on. And so, well, of course, it gets political, and it gets into criticism, and it gets sometimes on a kind of balance, well, with the host government where we work. But these are the kind of discussions that I guess our organization is ready to lead.
If I may also add from our side, before launching any type of project, we try to see the needs in that particular field, obviously, and we oftentimes commission studies, feasibility studies, and we consult the other development partners as well as the host government, because we want to help them overcome those needs. But obviously, we're also driven by the priorities that Switzerland has in that or this particular region. In our case, Arts and Culture project is also part of the governance domain, which is rather helpful because we see it as a whole and holistic. At the same time, again, good cooperation mechanisms with the governments through different projects basically very much also help us to do in cultural projects, because there is always this door opener existing there, and there is certain level of trust built. So thus they are more welcoming than, I would say, obtrusive in terms of activities. And we always explain to them the objectives of the project and what kind of results it should bring. And of course, we're working also with different population groups, and we try to reach out to those beyond the capitals, because population of the capitals here as well as elsewhere in the world more oftentimes enjoy access to much more opportunities than those in the regions. And now when the access to internet is more or less available throughout the South Caucasus, basically even in rural areas, especially this was triggered especially during COVID-19, when lots of schools and universities, the whole education went online. So now more and more people are having access to internet and the computer and electronic devices. So this allowed us to work even more with different population groups that are far away from the capitals. And we always try to involve also local authorities. And we were very happy to see that they were very much welcoming when they were seeing different initiatives. And they were even ready to contribute with even sometimes meager resources or in kind, but just to see certain mini festivals or screenings taking place in the allocations, because they thought that this would very much increase awareness of this particular region and will attract more tourists, and it will eventually obviously create more employment places and more income.
Thank you very much. I'm going to just bring in some of these questions that people have been typing as you were talking. I'll start with one for Ragheda and for Tamuna. how do you choose the groups that you work with? I think this is a little bit related to what we were talking about just now. Do you approach them, or are you actively seeking them? How closely does this align with your long-term strategy, or is it more ad hoc?
Okay, this is for me or for Tamuna?
Both of you.
Okay, so it's okay, I start. Now how we select our the people who are working with us, because I said that we have 3 interventions, different interventions. First of all, our program was built for a long term, and now we are on the 6th year now, which means we started 2016. And for the location team, we announce that everything that we do, we are announcing it. We announce, and we see in a location we wanted to do an intervention. We announced because we wanted a team that consists from artists, from social activists, and coordinator, something like that. So we announce, and then we select. For the schools, it's the same. We announce for the teacher who would like to participate. Then they have a course, a specialized course for social intervention and how to work on that, drama, social intervention, and so on. After that, with the selected teachers who participate, then they go to their schools and they start doing their intervention in the schools. Then they get from the schools out to their communities. This is how it's the interaction. Concerning the grants for the artists, it's already, we also announce it publicly, and the artists submit. And for the 3 of them, we have criteria, for the team, location team, for the schools, and for the artist also, we have a criteria for selection. And for the grants that we are giving for the artists, it's a lot. The project supposed to have a long. It will be for 1.5 years, because any intervention, social intervention, it needs time to do the change and to build something in the area you wanted to intervene. And there are a special committee who is appointed to do the selection. It's not, it's not us, but it is a specialized committee who select, depending on criteria for the artist and the grants. This is mainly how we are doing it. And of course, it is something related to our strategy, to the SDC strategy for a long-term engagement, and for encouraging civic engagement and democratic debate, and try to do some kind of a change with the society. That's how we are doing it. I hope I answered the question.
Thank you very much.
We in the South Caucasus, we do not implement the projects ourselves. We do have implementing partners in the Regional Arts and Culture Project. Basically, right now we are having 3 implementing partners. However, because each of the project phase, the way we call them, runs for 4 years at least, this allows us to plan well and ahead. So we do certain planning inside the office before we select the implementing partners, and then we do invest time in planning together with implementing partners. We do understand that our projects very much are part of development, and they also very much contribute to different reforms. And in order to achieve the reforms, we need quite some long-term commitments. Having said that, we always expect partners to come up with the right mix of population groups representing the regions or municipalities where we'll be working. For example, if we know that we're working closer to the administrative boundary line between the breakaway regions and the rest of Georgia, we expect that there will be conflict-affected population, IDPs, as well as hosts, so that there is no friction created. We also expect always selection of ethnic minority groups, whoever are living in different parts of the country. Obviously, we would be focusing on mountainous residents or forest-dependent communities, depending on where we're working. As just Ragheda said, we also have tenders and open calls. The implementing partners, they do announce tenders and open calls, and obviously there are very clear criteria according to which they artists are applying, and there is always jury that has its own criteria of selecting them, and we make the decisions very transparent. And then, of course, we are very much driven by leave no one behind principle. So we always try to reach out to those who are behind different population groups. So that the LNOB principle is something that we very much try to have in every project. And of course, Art and Culture project is part of that.
Thank you very much. I'm conscious of the time. We've got about 9 minutes left. I'm just trying to get in a couple more of these questions from the audience here. One for you, Rudi. Rudi mentioned that SDC works in post-conflict environments and recovery from disasters. Does SDC typically work in the preparedness, response, or recovery timeline, or all three? You did mention humanitarian work, so I'll perhaps you can pick up from there.
Yes, thank you. No, it's not necessarily that SDC works in post-conflict or conflictive areas of fragile states, but there are a couple of, as Jonathan just mentioned, we have a couple of, let's say, intervention lines, and the one is the humanitarian aid part, where, well, of course, it's post-disaster and it's conflict or post-conflict activities. But then again, we also have the development parts where, of course, SDC supports the host governments in the long-term development. So it's different. And then what's more and more the case, I'm thinking of the Sahel zone, but some countries also in Asia, there is both instruments that go together, and they go together in the so-called nexus, where you cannot only concentrate on the development part or only concentrate on the humanitarian part, but there are situations that go parallel, where you need to implement both instruments, humanitarian and development, let's say in a parallel way, in the nexus way.
Another unfair question, I think, to which I don't have an answer, but I want to pose to you. Some of the work that you had mentioned was about social cohesion and about conflict prevention. How do you measure that? If you've prevented something that hasn't happened, how do you build a narrative around a counterfactual to demonstrate that there is value in this type of work at the sort of social cohesion level? It's a question we've grappled with in projects that we've worked on elsewhere with other organizations, and I don't think anyone has an answer to it. So forgive me for putting you on the spot with an impossible question.
Thank you, Jonathan. We've talked to this a couple of days ago when you were visiting Switzerland, but maybe I start with an answer and then I give to one of my colleagues. Maybe they have a better answer, because I guess on the one hand, impact measurement is always a difficult thing in development or in humanitarian work, and maybe in cultural interventions it's even a bit more difficult. So in the end, it boils also down to trust and to, let's say, being convinced that cultural interventions, that artists and artivists contribute to social cohesion, because what they do is they detect, they discover, they open up, they contribute to debate, to discussion, all these aspects that I mentioned before, which in the end lead to some sort of a social cohesion, but also at times to conflict prevention. But maybe Ragheda or Tamuna, they have a good answer as well from their context.
Yes, I make quickly. As Rudi said, it's not something easy to measure the impact, but that's why we build our program on a long term, and we stay in the locations we're working for at least 2 or 3 years and then continue. That's where, in this way, you can really have something, a kind of a good impact in this society. I can give a quick example how it is the social cohesion after our intervention is done in a small village in Palestine called Al-Jarushiya. And the intervention was within the schools, and the teacher of the school started working with the students. And afterward, they went to the community and they start investigating and doing their research, not investigation, it's their research and so on, within about their roots, about their culture, about what their history. And within this, they all, the whole community, the whole village was taking part. It's a village around 2,000 inhabitants. They were all came on board. They opened their houses and start dialogue, they discover everything. At the end, they were asking for what? We need a place, because that's we can practice our talent, our taking part in art and culture and so on. And when I attended the last event there, and it was, you know, I was surprised how many people they were attending. They did their activities and they presented a play about that. We want a place there. And they did it in a house, in a place in a house and a big yard. And most of the people, they came, and then everyone now, they are working, trying to find a place for these young students. So here you could see that there is something coming, and that it's really encouraging. Even the head of the village council, he promised to find a place for them that they start practicing art, drawing, whatever, different kind of arts that they wanted to learn. So this is a kind of a way that where I see that you are it's more tied, the communities' relation together, they are becoming to know more about each other, and it is becoming much easier that you will be able to continue living, even if it is the situation around you is really very, very difficult. It's more for increase the resilience of the people in the area you are working on. This is how I see it.
I could add a couple of words on that, that every project that we are funding tries to measure, obviously, the results. And the results are being measured, as Rudi mentioned, on impact, outcome, and output levels. Without going into too much technicalities, obviously, arts and culture projects, they also have their own indicators. And there would be quantitative indicators which are relatively easy to measure. However, they would not necessarily capture those very intricate parts of the projects. And that's why we try to come up with good qualitative indicators that would allow us to measure how fast or how well the organization is trying to achieve the social cohesion, how receptive and open the formerly fighting sides are towards each other and the opinions expressed by each other. And for this, we do have some sets of indicators, as well as we have means of verification. And oftentimes the number of joint activities could already be a good indicator. Obviously, increase in the number of such joint activities could be a good indicator that we are on the right way. And as one example of means of verification, it can be citizens' perception studies or surveys, when we do ask citizens without staying anonymous. We ask them to answer certain questions, and this is how we also check their attitudes as well as the mood in the community. And obviously, this is also very helpful.
Thank you very much indeed. And Michael, I can see you've come back on the screen now, which tells me that we're probably drawing to the end of the hour, as we are, in fact. Thank you very much, Rudi, Ragheda, and Tamuna. I'll hand over to Michael now.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Jonathan. It wasn't intended as a hint to reappear, but yeah, you're right. We are at more or less the end of the time. I wanted to say it is a real pleasure for the RSAA to be able to host events that bring together experts in this way from Georgia and Jerusalem, as well as from Switzerland and the UK. It's one of the perhaps relatively few benefits of a life on Zoom. So a very warm thank you to Ragheda, Tamuna and Rudi. The next event in this series will be on the 23rd of March, when speakers from the Aga Khan Trust for Culture will be talking about the restoration of the ancient bazaar in Aleppo. And I hope that we will see many of you then. In the meantime, we will have a panel discussion on the impact of the Ukraine crisis, as I mentioned earlier, and after that, we will have Harold van der Linde talking about the economic geography of Asia as seen through the very varying characters of its stock markets. Please join us for those discussions too. But for now, I would like to reiterate our thanks to Jonathan for creating this series and to Tamuna, Rudi and Ragheda for 3 very informative presentations and the insights that they have given us all on both of the situations in Jerusalem and Georgia and on the very distinctive approach of the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation to the role of culture in development. For today, goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.